Hi guys, welcome back. We're here to continue Phantasma by Kaylie Smith. We left off where they were viewing their mother's body in the morgue, and she was the matriarch of the magic in the family. So yeah, and now they're walking home from after that. I want to show you guys that picture in the back at the end of this video. It's the ghost, but it's like a 3-layered, so when you walk past it, it looks like ghosts. But I got it from Michael's, and I was hoping it would show up better in the video, but it's not going to. So I'll show it to you after. And I'm going to order some backgrounds from Temu for this book, because this book renders like all the spooky things. Okay, so chapter 3, Rumors. The air in New Orleans was still abuzz with the strange tension Ophelia had noticed on their journey to the morgue. But as they made their way home, it felt slightly different. The idea of saying goodbye to their mother had surrounded her with a fog of feelings so thick she had only been thinking of grief before. Now, however, she saw that New Orleans was in rare form tonight. The streets of the Garden District were darker than usual, despite the lingering rays of the evening sun. The heels of Ophelia's boots clicked on the cobblestones of the sidewalk as she and Genevieve meandered down the road. Usually, the streets would still be packed with carriages and tourists heading to and from the quarter, jazz music humming somewhere in the distance. Instead, the street that stretched before them was still, drenched in shadows and a quiet that was loud and clear to Ophelia. Something insidious was in the air. "We need to get home," Ophelia urged to Genevieve as her gaze darted around them. "This is not right." "What are you talking about?" Genevieve asked with a raised brow. "Nothing seems wrong to me. No one's even out tonight." "Exactly," Ophelia muttered. "It's tourist season. Why is it so quiet?" "It was quiet earlier, too," Genevieve pointed out. "Maybe everyone decided not to risk being caught out in the rain. Those clouds are getting awfully close." Ophelia tilted her head back to peer up at the billowing gray clouds in the distance. Maybe Genevieve was right. Maybe no one wanted to risk the rain, but that still didn't explain the pit in her stomach, or why the branches of the live oaks lining the street seemed more twisted than usual, the moisture in the air more suffocating. Ophelia's pulse picked up its pace as something skittered deep in the shadows beyond the intricate wrought iron fencing of the houses to their right. Ophelia huddled closer to her sister as they slowed to a stop next to a cafe at an intersection. A breeze fluttering through her thick gray skirts, the familiar smell of fried pastries and powdered sugar hitting her nose a moment later. "Oh!" Genevieve grasped onto Ophelia's forearm, tugging her toward the cafe. "Give me a moment, Ophi. I see a friend." Before Ophelia could protest, Genevieve was entering the cafe, squealing a greeting to a girl Ophelia had never seen before. Ophelia pressed closer to peer through the door's glass panel as it swung shut. She watched as her effervescent younger sister threw both arms around the stranger with a familiarity that caused a lump in her throat. There wasn't a single person in the world other than Genevieve that Ophelia knew well enough to offer such a greeting. But here was Genevieve talking animately to this girl with flaxen hair, a sparkle in her vibrant, cerulean eyes that had been long absent in Ophelia's presence. "While you were stuck inside assisting your mother with calling upon the dead, your sister was making friends," the shadow voice told her. "Don't you hate her for it? Don't you wish you could make her hurt? Make her bleed? They think she's perfect and funny and pretty, and you're—" "Stop," she whispered aloud, reaching out to tap her knuckle against the glass. 1, 2, 3. The voice evaporated. "You hear? Pharaoh Henry claims he's entering. He's not going to make it 2 whole nights in that place if the rumors are true," a deep voice said from behind her. Ophelia twisted around to see the 2 men about her age heading toward her from across the intersection. "Richard Henry's nephew?" the other laughed. "He was born with a silver spoon in his mouth. I bet 20 silver pieces he leaves the first night because his room isn't luxurious enough. He'll be lucky if he doesn't die from a heart attack in the first 2 hours, the first man agreed. The first man, the taller one, barely spared Ophelia a glance when they made it across the street and shouldered past her into the cafe. The other took one look at her haunting eyes and flinched. They ambled right up to Genevieve, and she swallowed as her sister tilted her head back with a laugh, grasping onto the taller one with affection at whatever he had said. Despite the convincing show her sister was putting on that evening, was just fine. Ophelia knew Genevieve well enough to see there was a mask to hide the pain. The news had not likely caught fire in New Orleans social circles quite yet, and Genevieve was certainly not one to sour a good time with such a somber revelation. Ophelia had to look away from the scene. Genevieve had an entire life outside of Grim Manor. People she had made connections with, memories with, that Ophelia didn't even know the names of. Before she could spiral too deep into that train of thought, a flash of light reflected in the glass from behind her. She stumbled back from the door and spun around, nearly choking at what she found. There, a few feet away, was an apparition. Its form was hallowed in the same icy blue haze as the other she'd seen. Grim blue, of course. The apparition tilted their head at her. Ophelia swallowed. I'm not her. The apparition hovered closer. Go away. Ophelia shooed the apparition with a wave of her hand. I'm not her. She's gone. I'll never be her. Leave me alone. Because in New Orleans, everyone knew the prolific necromancer Tessie Grimm. Even the dead, especially the dead. The apparition opened their mouth as if to argue with Ophelia's claim, but before they could utter a word, someone walked right through their transparent body. They blew away like smoke on the wind. It's come here, I swear, the man who had just unknowingly walked through the apparition insisted to his partner as they strode by, heads bent together. Our past. The old cathedral, where the cemetery used to be. Emma said she saw it there yesterday. Ophelia's senses stirred at the man's words. She had been right. The fact that the only thing in this strange quiet was hushed rumors surely meant something wicked was in the air. Ophelia turned back to the cafe and pulled open the door. As she approached, Genevieve and her friends didn't even glance up from their conversation. A very hushed conversation. Ophelia cleared her throat. Genevieve? Genevieve stopped her whispering as the gaze shifted to Ophelia, a glint of surprise in her eyes. Like she had forgotten Ophelia was there at all. Oh, Ophi! It's almost dark, Ophelia said. There was no need for any other explanation. Genevieve was well aware why that simple statement incited urgency. Turning back to her friends, Genevieve sighed. I'm sorry, I have to go, but I will absolutely let you know when I'm feeling up for dinner. We'll have a lot to talk about. The others nodded in agreement, eyes flickering over Ophelia in curiosity, but none of them bothered to greet her or introduce themselves, which was just as well. Ophelia wasn't in the mood to socialize anyway. When they had stepped back outside, door firmly shut behind them, Ophelia asked, Who were they? Just some acquaintances, Genevieve answered with a flippant wave of her hand. Where did you meet them? Ophelia pressed. Genevieve's eyes slid to her sister with mirth. Nowhere insidious, if that's what you're wondering. Of course not. Ophelia shook her head, hooking her arm through Genevieve's to pull them faster down the street as another flash of glowing blue appeared over her shoulder. You just never mentioned them before. Are you all right? Genevieve asked. Another flash of blue to their right. Ophelia froze as her gaze clashed with the new apparitions. Ophi, you look like you've seen a... Oh... Genevieve's eyes widened. That's it, isn't it? You're seeing them now. Distract me, Ophelia urged. What were you talking about back there? They skipped over a hole in the pavement as they pressed on away from the garden district. Genevieve hesitated. Pharaoh Henry. Yes, that's right. Just pretty gossip about New Orleans' most infamous bachelor. Do you know him? Ophelia wondered. Those other guys were talking about him when they walked in. No, yes, no. Genevieve shook her head in frustration. He asked me to one of last year's balls. His father is the head of one of the Mardi Gras crews. Missed it. I didn't think you ended up going to any of the balls, Ophelia commented. Genevieve huffed. I didn't. I had planned to, made my dress and everything, but then that asshole stood me up and took someone else. I still made sure to show up to Mystic's parade, though. Couldn't resist the opportunity to make him squirm. Ophelia raised her brows at her sister's boldness, a laugh bubbling up in her throat. Genevieve had a mouth worse than a sailor at times, though the thought of anyone hurting Genevieve's feelings made her blood boil, not to mention it was laughable that anyone would find someone better than her sister. Genevieve would say Ophelia was biased, but the fact that there were multiple suitors sending love letters to the manor every month said otherwise. "Well, he clearly doesn't have a brain if he threw away his opportunity with you," Ophelia commented. Genevieve snorted. "That's right. I fucked his best friend on the back of the float as revenge." The sun dropped below the horizon now, and both of them instinctually picked up their pace as they passed the colorful rows of houses in the inner city. There were 2 golden rules their mother had taught them about roaming New Orleans after dark. The first was that if the dark looks at you, you never look back. That was a surefire way to be caught by a devil. Devils had roamed New Orleans as long as witches and vampires, longer even. Ophelia had never met one herself, and even with everything she'd learned from her mother about the insidious beings, she wasn't prepared for an actual encounter with one. Not yet. The second rule was if you did break the first, never ever make any deals with the devil, not unless you wanted to lose your soul, a concept many overly curious tourists never seem to learn, flocking to places like New Orleans, places rooted in magic, in search of things they knew nothing about. Those desperately fascinated with the types of beings who lurked in the dark hardly ever enjoyed the outcome of actually finding them. Ophelia glanced around to see there were very few other stragglers roaming the streets with them. A couple shopkeepers getting off work and brave street entertainers just beginning their days, which didn't help Ophelia's nerves. But at least they weren't completely alone. To punctuate that sentiment, a carriage zoomed past, the clip-clop of the horse's hooves on the pavement, melting in the sultry notes of jazz music that were climbing to a crescendo in the distance. A couple meandering toward them shook their heads at the sight of the sisters strolling arm in arm, and Ophelia wasn't sure if they disapproved of the 2 of them somehow, or if the gossip about their mother was already widespread enough for random locals to begin handing out their condolences. Regardless, the bone-chilling glare Ophelia shot in their direction was enough to make them flinch and hurry away. "Looks like Mom's gift of unsettling the city folk has been passed to you." Genevieve wrinkled her nose a little. "I won't lie, Ophi. It is a bit harder to look at you now." It was not shocking that Genevieve found the new color of Ophelia's eyes disturbing. Her younger sister had always had an issue making direct eye contact with their mother, and had made it abundantly clear all their lives that should Ophelia tragically pass on without any heirs of her own, Genevieve would not be carrying on the family legacy. The way people were easily vexed by their strange little family had always rubbed Genevieve the wrong way, and when Genevieve had reached a certain age, she even began to refuse to accompany their mother anywhere in town lest they run into any of her socialite friends. None of that had ever bothered Ophelia. Maybe because Ophelia knew this would be her fate one day, or maybe Genevieve was just embarrassed because her friends had told her to be, and Ophelia had never really had any friends of her own for such peer pressure to occur. The few times Ophelia had pursued suitors, they had ended with a quick, passionate affairs that fizzled out as fast as they began. Not a single one ever made it to the stage where she might introduce them to family. Ophelia couldn't help but wonder if she was wildly unprepared to assimilate into normal society without their mother as her guide. Death she was familiar with. Living would be the real challenge. Next to her, Genevieve suddenly shivered, turning to glance over her shoulder with a strange look in her eyes. "What is it?" Ophelia pressed. Genevieve hesitated. "Something one of my friends said earlier. About..." She shook her head. "Never mind. Let's just get home. I'm cold." "Let's catch a carriage," Ophelia insisted as the night closed in. "I know we shouldn't waste the money, but I don't want to be out here a second longer than we have to." One night until Phantasma. Chapter 4. Necromancy Business. There was an incessant pounding on the front door. Ophelia pried her eyes open at the noise. She reluctantly peeled herself out of her bed, fumbling around her room to pull on something decent before heading downstairs to see what all the racket was about. Genevieve was poking her own head out of her doorway, eyes filled with rage at the untimely disturbance. By the puffiness beneath her sister's eyes, Ophelia concluded that neither of them had gotten much sleep the night before. Ophelia had lain awake well into the witching hours, the time between midnight and 4 in the morning, when the veil between the mortal world and the other side was the thinnest. After returning from their hasty carriage ride, unable to stop thinking about her future, her magic, the strangeness of her locket pulsing around her throat. Now, Ophelia rubbed out her eyes as she yanked open the front door, blinking rapidly against the morning sunlight that flooded through the entryway. When the spots finally cleared from her vision, she found 2 men standing on the manor's front porch, neither of whom she recognized, looking as if they'd rather be anywhere besides Grim Manor at this early hour. Incidentally, she also wished they were anywhere besides her front porch. Ophelia Grimm? The first man questioned. He was an older, stocky gentleman with a thick, salt and pepper mustache that was ever so slightly crooked. His colleague was quite a bit younger and leaner, his hair and beard a bright red color that contrasted greatly with his dull gray 3-piece suit. Both of them were eyeing the unruly red roses that drooped from the porch beams as if they were knives and not flowers. Ophelia assumed it was odd for them to see roses growing in such a manner and place, but the roses were not her mother's favorite way of keeping unwanted apparitions out of the house and summon apparitions within. They had bushes and bushes of them bordering Grim Manor's exterior, crawling up the lattice work on the house's facade as well as lining the front fence and gates. Souls that are dead cannot cross roses of red, her mother had always chanted. Can I help you? Ophelia asked, not unkindly, but in a way that indicated this wasn't necessarily a convenient time. Genevieve came to stand behind her, glaring at the men over Ophelia's shoulder. Who in the holy fuck is knocking on people's doors this early in the morning? Our mother is no longer here to take appointments. If you have a dead relative, you're just going to have to suffer like the rest of us. Genevieve huffed, and Ophelia had to press her lips together to keep from laughing. The men weren't as amused. Excuse the unscheduled house call. My name is Mr. Mouton, and this is Mr. Lafferty, the mustached man said. We're from New Orleans City Bank. May we come in? What for? Genevieve snapped. There is some business with your mother. We were notified she recently passed. Our condolences. Genevieve narrowed her eyes. Business? Necromancy business, you mean? Ophelia clarified. No, Mr. Mouton shook his head. It's about the financial state of Grim Manor. What are you talking about? The manor has been in our family for almost a century. Unfortunately, your mother seems to have taken out some loans, and if you want to get back to sleep, Ophi, I can deal with this. Genevieve offered as she shouldered her way in front of her sister. No need for both of us to have a migraine this morning. Genevieve's words were nonchalant enough, but something about the tension in her sister's shoulders made Ophelia narrow her eyes. Before she could decline Genevieve's offer, however, the red-haired man blurted, This place isn't haunted, is it? Oh, for heaven's sake, Mr. Mouton admonished before turning back to the girls. I apologize. He isn't from here. He's unaware of the certain kinds of beings we have here in our little community. I thought you were joking about the necromancy thing, Mr. Lafayette retorted, appalled. As I was saying, Mr. Mouton went on, your mother's debts. There are a few documents we need you to come in and sign, and a few other things we should discuss. Would you be willing to come into town with us? I'll go, Genevieve offered once again. Do you have any identification, Mr. Mouton? Ophelia chimed before Genevieve could take a step over the threshold. How should we know you aren't trying to kidnap us? The man scuffed at that as he shoved a hand into his coat pocket and pulled out a card. It had the official seal of New Orleans City Bank embossed in the linen paper, his name written below. See, Ophi? It's fine, Genevieve pointed out. Go back to bed. Unfortunately, Mr. Mouton interrupted, since you both are equal shareholders in this estate, I'll need you both to come down with me. Genevieve's jaw clenched a bit, but she nodded. Give us a minute to lock up then. As if anyone would break in here, Mr. Laffey muttered at the same time that Mr. Mouton stated, There's a car out front of the gates. We'll wait. Ophelia retreated back inside to grab the key of the entryway table. A sinking feeling roiled in her stomach over what the man had said, and Genevieve's odd behavior. There shouldn't have been anything wrong with Grim Manor's finances. Their inheritance should have been enough to buy 3 estates if they wanted. Ophelia took a deep breath and tapped the key in her hand 3 times before sliding it into her pocket of her black pinstripe skirts. She picked up the black velvet ribbon that she had left on the entryway table as well, slipping it into her soft curls and tying a bow at the top of her head, before scooping a few of the coins that had been sitting beside it into another pocket, just in case. Once the house was locked up, the 2 of them started up the long driveway toward the motor car stalled past the gates. The noisy automobile was emitting a foul odor of smoke, and Ophelia made a face as she pulled her gloves from her pocket and slipped them over her hands. Mr. Lafitte stepped out of the passenger side, watching them approach with a skeptical expression as he pulled a metal lever behind the seat and folded it forward, gesturing for the 2 girls to climb into the back. Before they could squeeze themselves in, however, the rolling clacks of a horse and carriage sounded in the distance, making all of them turn as the vehicle approached. "What now?" Ophelia muttered. A woman, middle-aged, with dull brown hair, leaned out of the carriage window. "Hello, I have an appointment at 8 o'clock with Tessie Grimm. This is her residence, correct?" Genevieve looked the woman square in the eyes. "She's dead." Ophelia made a disapproving noise as her sister turned back to the hand Mr. Lafitte was reluctantly offering and climbed into the motor car. Ophelia turned back to the woman. "I apologize, but all appointments are canceled. We just haven't gotten around to calling everyone yet." The woman was gaping in shock, a hand fluttering to her chest with pity. "I'm so sorry to hear that. I had just spoken to her the other day." "So did we," Genevieve shouted from the car. "You have to excuse my sister." Ophelia pinched her nose before waving the woman off and turning to stuff herself in the back seat next to Genevieve. When they were both fully situated, Mr. Lafitte lifted his seat back up and ducked inside, slamming the door shut. "Must you be so brazen with people?" Ophelia whispered. Genevieve rolled her eyes and sank back into the cushioned seat. "The seats are comfortable, aren't they?" Mr. Moonton asked rhetorically as he shifted the stick between him and Mr. Lafitte forward. "It's the latest model." Neither girl bothered with an answer as they neatly folded their hands in their laps and looked out their respective windows, watching as Grim Manor faded from view behind them. The men carried on a conversation about cars for the next 10 minutes, possibly the dullest conversation Ophelia had ever heard in her life, before they both became suddenly quiet. "It's true, then." Mr. Moonton's voice was low as the 2 men gaped out the driver's side window. Mr. Lafitte shuddered. "I told you, I heard it just appeared." Ophelia slid across the back seat of the car, pressing herself against Genevieve's warm side so she could peer outside. The locket around her throat immediately began to pulse, but all she could see out of the small window was a crowd of people. Genevieve looked back at her and shrugged. "I always thought people were mad to believe those rumors," Mr. Moonton said. "The fools who enter those gates deserve everything they get." Ophelia rested her head against the window, the glass sticky from the morning humidity, and turned out their voices. She was so tired, and worse, she was worried. She couldn't imagine what might be wrong with her mother's finances that the bank would send someone to their house. Her mother had always implied their estate had been long paid off. The only expenses upkeep on the grounds and what it cost for them to live day to day. That didn't mean money hadn't been tight at times, of course. They still relied heavily on their mother's business and the regular income the people of New Orleans brought to their front door. For a moment, she wondered if there was some sort of inheritance tax they just needed to pay. If they'd have to begin hawking their valuables in order to transfer the estate into their names. Aside from a few pieces of jewelry and some of the antiques her mother collected, Ophelia couldn't think of anything inside Grim Manor worth selling. The most valuable thing she owned was hanging around her neck. As if it knew where her thoughts had turned, the locket began to pulse again. The golden bauble had been in her family for generations, enchanted with the powerful magic that bound it to its wearer. Her mother had always claimed it guided her through her toughest times, and that one day it would guide Ophelia. Ophelia looked down at the necklace, rubbing her thumb over the embossed damask pattern Of its outer shell, the crimson jewel nestled into the center of the front. She flipped it over and read the familiar words etched into the back. Follow your heart. She almost snorted, a cliched statement, or sentiment, that was much easier said than done. Sliding a fingernail into the locket's clasp, she tried to pop it open. It wouldn't budge. Her mother hadn't been lying all those times Ophelia had asked to see what was inside. You're fidgeting, Genevieve murmured next to her, picking absent-mindedly at her perfectly manicured nails. Ophelia glanced at her sister. I'm nervous, aren't you? Genevieve dropped her hands back in her lap and turned to look out her window, hiding her expression from Ophelia. Everything will be fine. Ophelia narrowed her eyes. Is there something you know? Before Genevieve could answer, the car lurched to the right, sending Ophelia sliding into Genevieve's side. Here we are, Mr. Mooten announced. New Orleans City Bank. Chapter 5, The Situation. Ugh, my eyes. I don't understand. Mr. Mooten sighed again, either in frustration from having to explain the situation to Ophelia for a third time, or because he was starting to believe she didn't have the wits to grasp what was happening. He fidgeted with his cravat as he leaned forward to point out the thickly inked words of the documents in front of her with his free hand. Your mother stopped making payments on the manor earlier this year. She was a large part of our community, and we recognize how much she did for the grieving families of New Orleans. We tried to prolong this unpleasant part for as long as possible, but the bank started the foreclosure process 2 months ago. Today marks the countdown to the last 30 days until it becomes our property. We need you both to sign this document stating that you have been informed of the situation. But why did she take out a loan in the first place? Grim Manor had been in our family for generations. My sister and I have lived here our whole lives, and not once have I ever seen a collection letter or... He cut her off, double tapping a line in the document resting on the desk. It says right here that she took out a cash loan against the manor's equity for personal use. Nearly $35,000 with interest. She's only paid $5,000 back. See? These are the carbon copies of the checks. Ophelia reached out almost subconsciously and tapped her finger once over the line he had just been pointing at before dropping her hands back into her lap as she continued to study the slips of paper between them. He gave her a strange look, but she ignored him as her mind raced to process this new information. 3 of the $1,000 checks were made out in her mother's pristine handwriting. The other 2, however, Ophelia narrowed her eyes. The slight shakiness of the connecting S's on Tessie Grimm's signature was the only giveaway that someone had forged them. She flicked a glance over at Genevieve, who was being oddly quiet in the face of this news, but her sister wouldn't look back at her. What can we do to stop this? Ophelia demanded. If it's foreclosed on, couldn't we buy it back from the bank? Mr. Mooten pulled out a pocket watch as he answered. Unless either of you are going to come up with that money in the next month, I don't think there's anything you can do. The demolition date has already been set. The city has had its sights set on that land, as well as your neighbor's land, for some time. They want to install more modern housing, maybe even a hotel or 2 for tourists. My advice would be to sign over the rights now and give yourself a head start to begin considering other places to live. Well, then we don't need your advice, Ophelia told him before standing up and scraping her chair back. He winced at the sound. We won't be signing anything. We're not going to hand over our home to you. He shook his head in pity. The house is getting torn down whether you like it or not, Miss Grimm. Signing the papers is merely a legal formality. At that, Ophelia swiped the papers off his desk and stalked out of the building, Genevieve silently following on her heels. Okay, so we're still in the very, very beginning, but we left off on page 40. And we'll just, first sentence at the top. But what do you guys think? I mean, the apparitions and everything is going to become more clear, but I've never read anything like this. That's for sure. I'm excited to read it because it is a bestseller, and maybe we'll do the whole collection. A couple of viewers wanted to read the rest of, the last book. There's 2 other books. So we'll see after this what we do. But thank you guys for being here, and I look forward to reading more with you. Bye.